I've been manufacturing and sourcing offshore now for just a little over 17 years. Seen a lot of change in that time. I mean, it's probably never been easier than what it is now to find an offshore supplier. And when I first started out, we were flicking through printed catalogues of suppliers to try and find someone suitable for what we were looking for. I mean, there were some limited sort of online tools, but there wasn't a lot on there. I mean, we're still working off dial-up, so it was a case of finding someone's phone number, having a conversation over the phone in broken English and trying to get to the bottom of what you needed, sending faxes back and forth. So I'm showing my age, but so yeah, it's never been easier than what it is now. I mean, the likes of Alibaba and other online platforms certainly made it easy to go on and find the sort of supplier that you're looking for. But I think with that ease of use has also increased the risk. You know, it's also never been easier for a supplier or somebody offshore to set themselves up as a supplier. So you need to be very careful and make sure that you've got a good solid process that enables you to work through all those listings and really weed out the good from the bad. Without that process, you're really setting yourself up for failure. I mean, I've seen listings on there with what I call copycat suppliers. I mean, we had a range of products at one stage, and I went onto Alibaba and I found all of our products on this particular supplier's listing. They'd taken our images off our website, our descriptions. I think they'd even used our product codes. So I even had a couple of customers come to me and say, "I think I found your supplier online." It's like, it's not my supplier. It's just some random guy who obviously likes our products. So I take it as a compliment. But he's just put that up there on the listing in the hope of drumming up some business for this particular line of products. So you've got to be really, really careful and know who you're dealing with. So again, it's about having process to be able to identify who's a real supplier and who's not. And then really you need to be able to talk to these suppliers and vet them through a number of different sort of avenues, looking at their previous work, asking for examples of what they may have done, asking for references or even trade references. I always look to ask for trade references from local market, whether it's Australia or New Zealand or even the US. That way you can get on the phone, you can speak to somebody who may have dealt with this person and actually verify that they exist and B, yes, they do a good job as well. We look for factory auditing and certification that they may have as well, and really just try and build a case of what do these guys have as credentials, so that we can then work through that, and then you start to get a good gauge of whether they're a legitimate supplier or not, and then you can start the conversation from there. I think once you start that conversation too, you need to be mindful of, are they asking you the right questions? Do they seem like a specialist in this field? Do they seem to have any technical knowledge of these particular products that you might be dealing with, or are they asking really basic questions? You know, I mean, technically these guys should know more than what you do, because they're the experts in the field, they're the manufacturer. So if you're not getting the right vibe from that, then you probably need to follow your gut on that, because in 17 years when we're starting out, I mean, you throw a lot of Hail Marys, you really do, and it's only through making mistakes that we've developed a process to eliminate those issues and a lot of those risks. So step one is to really know your supplier and be confident from the outset that they're the right supplier for you and for the product you're looking to create. Step two is really, again, having a good solid process around your sampling and production processes. Again, if you're getting any bad vibes, always better to pull the pin early. So it's you've got to go with your gut. But yeah, if you're not getting the desired outcomes, or may feel like you're making good solid progress at an early stage, then there's probably an issue there. You quite possibly are not dealing directly with a factory. You might be dealing through a trader or a middleman or a series of traders. I've seen situations where there might be 3 or 4 people between the person who's looking to source and the actual factory. So a lot can get lost in translation. So you need to be mindful of that. In terms of the information you provide the factory, you've got to make sure that's absolutely clear. There's, again, when we started out, it was pretty basic. We were sending faxes or pretty rudimentary sort of emails up to the factory in terms of what we required. It's literally just hand drawing specifications or whatever it may be. I mean, we now have a team of designers who put all the specifications together for us, so a lot less is sort of left to chance. But if you're not in a position to do that, you need to get yourself in a position to do that, to actually give them the full specification and think about everything. In our early days, we had some hilarious situations where orders were turning up and with the funniest sort of carton markings just on the box. I mean, the product inside was fine, but some of the stuff that got put on the outside of the box, like TBC, because when we placed the order, we said the carton markings were, to be confirmed, and literally that's what turned up on the box was TBC. So, you've got to think about every possible situation and make sure you outline that from the start. So once you've nailed off your specification documentation, and I think it's really important you go through that point by point with your supplier, you're ready to go to the pre-production or sample process. Now, it's throughout that process that you're going to get even more of a gut feel for how specialist they are. You're going to be monitoring them, they're going to be asking you questions, you're going to be hopefully getting some images along the way of sort of progress reports of where they're at. And then once you've, again, you just got to monitor that, make sure you're comfortable throughout that entire process. Hopefully when your sample turns up, it looks pretty good. And for the most part, it should be a representation of what you're going to get in bulk production. And it should be to your specification. If there's any variations to your specification, they should be highlighted to you. And quite often you'll have maybe substitute materials or fabrics may have been used for whatever reason. But so long as that's highlighted, you can kind of work through that process, and then you know exactly what to expect when you go into production. So once you've signed off that sample, sometimes you might take 2, 3, 4 samples to get it right, and it's important that you do get it right. But once you've worked through that process, then you're ready to go to your bulk production. So with that, you'll probably at that point feel like you've worked through the hardest part of the process, but you're really only just beginning. And for lack of a better term, assumption's the mother of all fuck-ups. So you really can't take your eye off the ball at this stage. You've got to basically micromanage the entire process from woe to go. We work with independent QC agents to basically be our eyes and ears on the ground, as well as having our own people in China. But that really just helps mitigate risk and also just pick up on any issues throughout the process. So you might want to organise a due pro or a during production inspection, which is basically where your inspector will go into the factory based on your specification. They'll be checking everything off, making sure that everything is as you've ordered. And at that point, any minor variations maybe can be fixed, because once you get to the end of the process, there's really no chance to fix anything. Like goods are made, it's really hard to go back through, on that process. So that's a really key thing to do, especially on those bigger orders. And then you might want to look at doing an FRI, or final random inspection. I mean, we do that on every single order that we do offshore. And that just ensures that we are receiving what we are expecting to receive. We don't want any surprises when it arrives here in New Zealand. The thing is with offshore production, especially when you're just starting out, is you're probably going to have to pay your supplier at least 30% up front, sometimes 100% up front. So again, another good reason to understand and know your supplier. And then when it comes time to ship those goods, you've got to pay them the other 70. So you're 100% exposed before you've seen those goods yourself. So you have to have that inspection happening at origin, because by the time you receive it, it's going to cost you a lot of money to fix any issues, if they can even be fixed. So that's really important, just to make sure that you're working through that process and crossing everything off. From there, you really just need to make sure you've got a good freight forwarder who can work you through that process, especially if you're just starting out. You've got to deal with cut-off times and different freight methods, whether it's LCL, FCL, or air freight. There's different shipping transit times that you might want to work through, and you've got to make sure that you're going to get the goods in time for when you actually need them, because you don't want to deliver late for yourself or for your client or whoever you may be doing this for. So it's important that you're working with your freight forwarder to make sure that you know when the goods are going to turn up, and make sure you're giving yourself plenty of buffer time throughout that process as well, because things can happen. Even you can cover the process up until the point it leaves the factory, but ships can run late, airplanes can run late. It's completely outside of your control. So make sure you give yourself plenty of buffer time on that. So hopefully, provided you follow a good process, your goods will turn up and everything's fine. So that is what you hope to happen, but that's not always the case. When you're spending a lot of money with an offshore supplier, you've got to be really, really careful. If you're spending 30% up front in terms of deposit to get order underway, then sometimes things don't go to plan. If it's not a supplier you've necessarily worked with before, you just don't know what's going to happen. So you've got to, right from the outset, you've got to ask yourself, what's my risk profile on this? How much am I actually prepared to lose on this? Because if you're basically sending money to a guy you've never worked with before, even though you may have done your due diligence, is that money you're prepared to lose, or you can afford to lose? So you've got to really balance that up with the upside of controlling these processes on your own. I mean, you could work with a third party, someone that can mitigate a lot of that risk for you. They can take a lot of that financial burden away, but then you may make less margin, but then you've got a whole lot more work to do on top of it as well. So you've really got to check and measure it to make sure that it's not more than you can afford to lose. I was talking to a guy up in Hong Kong once, and this is many moons ago, but he went to a factory to do a QC on a container load of TVs that was going to the Middle East, and he got to the factory and they'd already been loaded into the container, which is not what he agreed. And so they just pulled out a few from the container, and they're like, oh, we can't unload the whole container, that's unreasonable. So he checked a few pieces with his QC agent, and they made sure the TVs were all okay, all up to spec, and everything was fine. They put them back in the container, and off they shipped to the Middle East. Months later they arrive, and he gets a call from his customer saying, what have you done? I don't know what you mean. So apparently the TVs at the front of the container were all good working TVs. The TVs at the back were TVs inside the boxes. They had no working componentry inside them. They were just empty shells. So we went back to the factory was gone. I mean, that's a pretty bad example, but that is kind of worst case scenario, as you could get ripped off. So again, you've got to make sure that are you prepared for that. You can't get insurance against that, so you've got to make sure that you've got the right processes in place. You're doing everything throughout that process to mitigate your risk, and I guess you've got to follow your gut along the whole way as well, because your gut's normally right. But at the end of it all, if you haven't got the appetite for risk, then I suggest you don't do it, because it can be a scary sort of business to be involved with, when you're so far removed. So yeah, process is key. Due diligence is key. Having people on the ground to check those orders and check that quality, and make sure you're getting what you want to get, so you're not getting any surprises at the other end, and just working in with good partners along the way to try and mitigate risk and get a good result. As well as a robust QC process, you may need to consider what your testing process is going to be as well. I mean, for us personally, we have a pretty basic sort of philosophy on that. products basically. If it touches the skin, if it goes in the mouth, if it is for kids or it gets plugged into the wall, then it has to be tested. I mean, New Zealand legislation doesn't really have a lot of rules around importation of product, not like the way that Europe does, for example. So we always go above and beyond the requirement, because everything we do is working with someone else's brand. You know, we're always working with a third-party brand. It's not our brand, so we need to be mindful of that and respectful of that, and make sure that, you know, we're not risking their brand as well as our own throughout the process. So I think that's a really important thing to be mindful of when you are importing products from offshore, is to make sure that they are at bare minimum meeting the requirements of the market that you're importing them to, but even go above and beyond it, particularly when you're dealing with a third party brand. So I guess in summary, it's really key to have a really robust process from start to finish, and look to mitigate risk wherever you can. Learn from any mistakes that you might have along the way, or even like little things that might crop up. Just bear those in mind for the next time you start on the process, so you don't kind of repeat those same mistakes, because the mistakes can get expensive. And if you can't stomach mistakes, if you can't afford to lose the money that might be on the line, then maybe reconsider your approach. Maybe work with a third party who can handle a lot of that for you, so you're not kind of betting the house to try and control everything. So you know, it is a lot easier than it's ever been in terms of finding suppliers. Even working through freight and duties and all that sort of thing is a lot easier than it's ever been. But also there's still a lot of risk, and you need to be prepared for it, and have a good process that's going to try and cancel out as much risk as possible, and hopefully you have a nice successful project.